Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we are spotlighting a groundbreaking collaboration that's reshaping how Black voices are heard. Literally. In the age of AI, Howard University and Google have launched what they are calling Project Elevate Black Voices. It is a bold new initiative aimed at addressing the often bias that has long plagued speech recognition technology. Howard University and Google officials join me tonight to break down how this shift could enhance the Black experience with artificial intelligence. My guests are Dr. Lucretia Williams, project lead and Howard University researcher, and Dr. Courtney Heldreth, co-principal investigator at Google Research. Thank you both for joining the conversation. This is fascinating to me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. Excited to be here.
Sure thing. Let me start with some basics. What inspired Google to come to Howard University to focus on addressing AI's ability to recognize Black voices, Dr. Heldreth?
Yeah, so at Google, our mission is really to make sure that technology is universally accessible and inclusive for all. And when we looked at voice recognition products in particular and voice technology, we realized that we were sort of falling short of that mission. So in some of my own research and also research that is externally published, what we've learned are that Black speakers have poorer experiences than white speakers when it comes to voice technology. In fact, in a seminal paper, they found that Black speakers experience twice the word error rate compared to white speakers. And so, we really want to make sure that technology works well for everyone. And so we were really inspired to change this problem. Me coming from the Black community, I wanted to make sure that we solve this problem because it directly impacts me and my family. And so we set out to try to address this. And that's where really Howard came into play.
Why do you suppose that it is a problem?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why speech recognition systems don't work well for everyone. So first, the foundation of any machine learning model is the data, right? We have to make sure that the data is representative of all voices, accents, and dialects. And what we've learned are that voice data sets really do sort of favor mainstream American English, right? So this is the data of traditionally white speaking English speakers in the American context. What we've also learned are that transcription guidelines. So what ASR systems do, automated speech recognition systems, is they convert spoken word into text. And so you need really proper transcriptions in order to make sure that the systems can understand what people are saying, right? And what we've learned are that the transcription guidelines defaulted to mainstream American English and did not account for African American English dialects. One of the things that we might also do is use other data sets like YouTube data or even our own internal data to try to figure out how to address this problem, right? But because self-ID is very delicate, right, we don't want to identify voice based on race. So for privacy reasons that are, I think very reasonable, we don't self-ID people in the data sets. So we have a really hard time differentiating mainstream American English speakers from folks who might speak different dialects and different accents. So all of these reasons sort of calls on new methodologies, novel methodologies to try to address this problem more comprehensively. And one of those are new data sets that are representative of Black language.
Dr. Williams, what role will Howard University be playing in this process?
Yeah, so this process was a long journey, right? So basically we created and put together the data set. So we collected 600 hours of African American English audio from across the United States. It was like over 32 states. And we went into about 8 different communities, went into 8 different cities to actually source participants from the Black community, just talk to them about like AI and let them know what we were doing. We were trying to make the data sets more inclusive to improve automatic speech recognition technology. And a lot of people were excited. So I think like Howard University owns the data, and thank you to Google because they sponsored the project. So we are able to just keep catapulting on top of the data set that we have, and maybe it'll be a version 2.0 soon in the future.
Explain to me how that worked. You say 32 states or 32 cities?
32 states.
32 states.
Yes.
So how did you pick the people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we started off with recruiting from the network at Howard University. You know, Howard University, we have a lot of ties to Black communities globally, right? So through whether our sorority connections, fraternity connections, our other community-based organizations that we know in different states around the United States, we, shoot out an email saying, hey, here's what we're doing. We want to kind of have this project that we think you will be important to be involved in, right? So we did community events in New Orleans when we went to Xavier University, Northern California, Southern California, Atlanta, DC, New York City, so like in Chicago as well. And we wanted to just make sure we hit the major cities where there were large Black populations there, right? So we kind of connected with people who we knew in the cities, and we put together a panel or a round table. In Chicago, we went to like a community festival where we set up a table. So we just wanted to make sure that we went into the communities and like really got involved and not collect this data passively.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add is geographic diversity is really critical to create good speech data sets. Black language, Black dialect, African-American English is not a monolith, right? How Black folks in California speak is very different from Black folks from rural Tennessee, right? And so making sure that this data set captured the broad, beautiful diversity of Black language was really important. And so Howard did just an incredible job, using both their reputation and their networks and the trust that they've built within the community to really identify people who wanted to participate in this project. And that makes for a very robust, diverse data set of Black language that is not just, in one city and one dialect.
But Dr. Heldreth, to your point, for the purposes of not just this project, but AI more broadly, how is Black English defined? And how do you give it to the AI technology so that it understands that it is what it is? And let me provide just a tad bit more context. If you are talking to a white guy and a Black guy who are raised in a same community, and same urban community or same Southern community, if they were raised in Biloxi, Mississippi, and lived next door to each other, they would sound alike. Mm-hmm. And although their individual cultures may be different, so how do you differentiate that?
Yeah, so we partnered with sociolinguists, particularly Zion Mengesha, who's now at UCLA, a linguistics professor there, who actually wrote this amazing paper that focused on racial disparities in automated speech recognition. Her research lies at this interesting intersection of critical race theory and language. And she helped guide us through our recruitment methodology. And one of the ways that we identified Black speakers is to ask about race and ethnicity in the screening criteria. So our inclusion criteria was anyone who self-identifies as being African American. You bring up a good point, right? So if white and Black folks are living in the same county in a rural area, they might sound alike. But what we learned from our research, we ran a diary study with 30 participants across the United States to understand whether the experiences of voice technology are actually felt, what's really different is that even though they may speak similarly, their attributions for when these, what we call word error rates, occur in the technology, so when it doesn't work for them, are very different. So what we learned are that Black speakers experience more frustration and anger, and they attribute the errors due to race and ethnicity. We're not seeing the same effects for white speakers, right? They're able to attribute the errors to, the technology not working well for them. But what we saw in our research was a lot of internal attributions. Oh, it's because of me, my race, where I'm located, but also the way that I speak. And so the experience, the psychological experience of not being understood, is really felt by the Black community, right? And it ties back to a lot of the research on linguistic discrimination. When you look at, seminal court cases, when Black speakers speak African-American English, we're finding that they are being sentenced at higher rates when they're applying for loans or for housing, when African-American English is perceived to be the dialect, we're finding that there's discrimination happening. So there are meaningful differences. We can speak the same, but because of the color of our skin and how, racism exists in the world, our experiences with our language and how we're treated are very, very different. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we, speak to that, to our data set, by making sure we identify folks who are African American.
So let me ask the really hard question, because if you are interacting, I pause to use the word conversing with these machines. Let's just keep it simple. Dr. Williams, are we suggesting that bias is built in to where we currently are with AI? Because if you are interacting with an AI platform, let's just say Google's platform, Gemini, for example, and it's I do read. So if I ask Gemini, if Gemini is interacting with me, or let's say with Dr. Williams, and Gemini asks, well, what's your name? And you say Lucretia, and Dr. Heldreth is sitting there and it says, what's your name? Do we run the risk that the system, the AI system, will assume that Dr. Williams is Black and Courtney is white?
Yeah, there has been cases where that has happened. So I will say AI technologies sometimes take on biased roles, but that also has to do with the problem of like the data sets not being inclusive, like the data sets that we train the models on not being inclusive, which is why this project is very important, because in order to have accurate data outputs for these AI technologies, the data needs to be just as accurate, right? So, and also another standpoint of it is also like who's building the technology, right? That speaks to another diversity issue, is there's not a lot of Black folks in these engineering teams, and researchers and AI evaluators. So I think it's a twofold problem of making sure like Black voices are being heard within our data, but also that we are in the room, we are on the teams, and we are actually thought leaders in the AI space. Because through our lived experience, we can understand what would be a bias and what most likely an output would be if we prompt something, or if we ask a technology to in a certain way with a certain accent. We will know Siri's gonna say, "I didn't understand you." We'll know right away, right? But I think it just fits to the larger conversation of making sure that the Black community is included in the next set of innovation technologies.
Absolutely. And I will just add to that, like, Technology is not neutral.
Dr. Heldreth, don't forget your point. Forgive me. I need to take a break, but please do not forget your point, because we're going to pick this up on the other side. I want to remind our listeners, don't forget you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation tonight about AI and how Black voices can be included in the technology. My guests are Dr. Courtney Heldreth, co-principal investigator at Google Research, and Dr. Lucretia Williams, project lead and Howard University researcher. Before the break, Dr. Heldreth, you were about to make a point. Please continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, technology is not neutral, to Lucretia's point. We have amassed a ton of research that suggests that what AI does, because as Lucretia mentioned, it is trained on data sets that are generated by humans. And so what it does is it encodes human biases and historical patterns of biases and discrimination. So some examples of that, right? I think some of the examples that are most salient to me are in healthcare, right? When there's this really famous algorithm that was used by health insurance companies to be able to basically predict the illnesses of folks and therefore fray the cost of healthcare. Very popularly used. And what they found were that even though Black patients were sicker than white patients, they received a lower risk score than white patients. Now, something really interesting, they didn't include race in the model, because you might be thinking oh, they just included race and thought that Black people are just going to have a lower risk. But what they did and where they went wrong is that they included cost of care as a proxy for severity of illness. And what that ended up doing is, because white people, we tend to spend more on white people in the healthcare industry, it underestimated Black patients' needs. And this was a highly used algorithm, right? And what they ended up finding is that they used things like the frequency and severity of illness. They would have found that Black people are actually twice as ill, 2 times more ill than white patients. So this is just one of the many examples where we're finding that algorithms are biased. Algorithms are not fair. And so it's really important to be intentional about how we design these data sets and how we design these algorithms, or else we're going to fall prey to these biases.
I really think that is an excellent example, because we often hear in the town square discussions about health disparities, and what you were able to do is to really articulate quite precisely health disparities to, I have to remember who I'm talking about, or not even the who, but the what I am talking about, that does not really understand what a health disparity is until they are told, or it is told. And this is the confusing part, because I'm referring to the it's as the who and the they, which is another part of this conversation as it relates to not understanding, but the evolution of this technology, and particularly as it relates to speech patterns. How are examples of slang incorporated, Dr. Williams? Because we know that slang is part of every geographical region's, speech pattern, dialect. So and slangs change from year to year. I'm still trying to figure out what my daughter is telling me after I got her slang from last year down. So is that part of this?
Yeah, so and that's also when Courtney was mentioning like the transcriptions and making sure we capture certain nuances of our participants when we collected their data. So slang is an important part of African American English, and it's various across the region. So like I'm from the Bronx, I'm from New York City.
Yes, I can tell.
That's hilarious. What we say and how we talk in New York is totally different from DC, totally different from Atlanta, you know. So I just think like when we have certain even intonations and like the different way we pronounce our vowels, the long A's and the O's and the twos and stuff like that, like it's really important. And I think like to capture those nuances, whether it's whether you're speaking to your Alexa or your Siri or your Google Home, oftentimes depending
Alexa,
on how you
stop.
oh
Go ahead.
Pardon, activated Alexa. Let me stop saying it, okay? But it's really important because sometimes people use their personal devices for health, health causes, and also to contact family members. And I always say, not everyone has the ability to code switch. And I think like just the way you talk and like the certain ways you will call somebody and the certain things you will say, it really means, and it's an integral part of your identity, and it's an integral part of how you communicate. And with our personal devices, like it's important to realize like we pay a lot of money for these things, right? And being that it's baked into all of our, and at the airport, all of our things that we use in society now, that we just need to make sure that everyone has the ability to use it, right? And that you aren't feeling alienated in some way, or that a part of your identity is being stripped or changed because I have to now talk a certain way. Or if you can't even talk a certain way, you know, there's elderly folks, there's people with disabilities and different speech patterns where you don't have the ability to do that. So I think like just the overall slang is important. And also it makes me think about the Trayvon Martin case where his I think his girlfriend was on the stand, and then she was saying certain things, and they were trying to say like, "Oh, is that what you were meaning?" Like, "Oh, but it's how you talk there, right?" But in court proceedings, they're trying to twist her words as though she was referring to something else, where it's like, no, that's not what she was referring to. And a lot of the times, it in some areas, like the way we talk and communicate is a life or death situation. And I think like as technology progresses, like it's more important that like our developers and our researchers really make sure that we get it right.
So to a point that Dr. Heldreth made earlier, and I will use myself as as an example. First of all, code switching is not a problem for me because I am multilingual in various and sundry codes, including colorful metaphors that we can't use on this program. That being said, I have found that even talking to my iPhone, voice to text, and I think I speak fairly well, considering what I do for a living, and yet it still does not pick it up. And unlike what you suggested earlier, Dr. Heldreth, with the impressions that Black people may have in using this technology versus white people, I know it ain't me. It's the machine. So I say, or I suspect that as advanced as it is, that it still isn't getting it right.
Right. So there are a couple of things that happen when you speak to your phone, right? There is automated speech recognition, right? So can my phone even understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? Then there's what we call natural language understanding, right? NLU. So this is like, can the algorithm then take what I'm saying and make an action based on what I'm saying. Understand the words, the sentence structure, the phonemes, all of the syntax, and then know what it wants me to do. So even if you're code switching, even, why people still have this problem, right? The models, AI is very ridden with problems, right? It's sometimes it is race agnostic. Sometimes it just does not work for anyone. And so there could be problems happening on the speech recognition side, but it could also be happening on the language understanding side. But what we do know is, because we have so much more data for mainstream American English, that those problems are less likely to happen for white folks than Black folks. So that's kind of, the way that I think about it.
And I will also say that while this hasn't happened yet, but I am concerned that even if I'm doing voice to text on my laptop, as I'm interacting with an AI platform asking about Black stuff, or if I type it, for example, if I were to say, where can I find the best Black cultural activities for the 4th of July weekend? And the response is, well, you know what I'm saying? It's like over here in Southeast. I joke about that, but I think the reality is that the technology may go left and assume that because I am a Black person, that it may give me an answer because it is disseminating the information, throwing, Black slang or what have you. And then I would be upset.
That's right. As we all would.
Yeah.
So there's this fine line, right? I think the thing that is happening with AI systems more and more is it starts to take on what we call anthropomorphic properties, right? It's becoming more and more human-like. And part of being a human is, think about it, when we're in this conversation, sometimes I might match Lucretia's hand movements. I might shift my voice patterns to kind of be more on parity with you, Harold, right? So there are these ways that we as humans naturally adapt to a conversation and adapt to an interaction that AI is now starting to do. And that can be uncanny, right? Like, listen, I didn't ask you to speak to me like I speak to you, and then you're doing it. And I think that's where research is so important in this field, because what you experienced, Harold, is reproducing racial tropes, right?
Right. And like I said, I did not, that was an example. It hasn't happened. I was saying my fear is that it may, but please continue.
Well, there are some people who are doing it, right? Like there are some models that now can speak AAE back to you. And there's this question of, listen, should it? And if so, in what context? And I think that's where research is becoming increasingly important. We need to understand how the community feels about this. Should Alexa speak like a Black woman? Should ChatGPT generate AAE responses if it detects that you are speaking AAE to it? It's not as black and white as that, I imagine. What are the use cases? What is the value it brings back to the community? And I think that that's where more research is needed in order to really, really understand what those use cases are and what the need is.
Now, here's a question for both of you, but I'll start with Dr. Williams. With that said, trying to make sure that this technology is more inclusive of not just Black people, obviously all people, considering our current political climate, are you at all concerned, Dr. Williams, that there are some powers that be that may give pushback on the DEI of it all?
Yeah, well, being at Howard University and we are at HBCU, we are in a weird place where there are executive orders and of the type of research that we should be doing, because We are now an R1 institution. Well, we reclaimed R1 status. But then we also have this executive order where we're pushing for HBCUs to do more research, and have funding and things like that. So balancing on staying true to our mission of Howard University and making sure that we are doing the research to move innovation forward for diverse populations, but then also taking into consideration, okay, we see where the world is going, but like AI should be fair, ethical, inclusive. It should be all of those things. And if we are saying, as a nation, we want to be the forefront leaders of AI, this is the kind of work that we have to do. We can't historically exclude our community time and time after again. So I will say, this is the opinions of my own. I don't speak for everyone else. Like, I will stand true to that mission and making sure that like I further the research of making AI like fair and ethical. Like I feel like this is the work we have to do, because we can't keep putting out next generation of models and new innovation where we haven't fixed, the problems of, model one, right? So it's weird and interesting, but we have to do the work. So
Dr. Hildreth?
Yeah, I don't want to weigh in too much on this question, given my position at Google. But what I will say is Google is very committed to making sure that technology works well for everyone. And I think there are lots of examples of that through our language inclusion efforts, Project Elevate Black Voices, but also, our desire to make sure that more languages and dialects are represented in our data sets. We've done a lot of like really important work on skin tone and representation and making sure that people, when they use our technologies, do feel like they are included. And like Dr. Williams says, there's so much more work to be done to make sure that these models don't reproduce historical biases and systemic racism. And I believe that Google is committed to doing that work, and I am, committed to pursuing this work as well.
Speaking to the thing about facial recognition and the pace at which this technology is moving, I remember a year or maybe at the most 2 years ago, Dr. Hildreth, when you're talking about video, and I know that Google has also rolled out its new video generator just this week. What is it, VEO3 or VO3? Haven't had a chance to look at that. But again, more broadly, there were a lot of mistakes as it related to Black people and people of color when you would ask a video generator to paint a picture of a Black woman, for example, and you got something that looked closer to a Martian alien. But now we are seeing more accurate depictions of that. How did that happen? Is it the same kind of research that you're doing now as it relates to voices? How has that moved so quickly? Is the technology learning, or has there been input from the community to make sure that the technology understands?
Yeah, so I don't personally work on the VO project, so I can't comment about sort of how they've improved their models. But what I will say is that I've also experienced those improvements, and I think it's wonderful. I think that most of these improvements are happening because our models are getting better based on the data that they are being trained on. We also have better evaluation frameworks, right? So we're trying to make sure that people are properly represented and authentically represented. And the ways that we do that, as Dr. Williams mentioned earlier, is to make sure that we are feeding these models with representative data of diverse people. And that all helps with model accuracy and precision, right? We want to make sure that we have ample data sets of diverse people in order to make sure that we represent them when they're generated appropriately. And so, yeah, I think that there's just been, I think across the board, especially at Google, some massive, impressive improvements when it comes to the representation of people who come from different racial ethnic groups.
Dr. Williams, the Elevate Black Voices project, is this a finite project, or is this something that will be ongoing?
Yeah, so we hope that it will be ongoing, but that's always a funding thing. We have to find more funding to to have a data set 2.0. But the goal, future goals is to have dialects across the African diaspora. But right now, that's a ways time. But we did want to start an HBCU consortium with our data set. So the goal of that is to make sure like HBCUs have like access, which they do have first access to the data set currently. But like we can like catapult research ideas and collaborate amongst each other, making sure we have a shared understanding amongst other HBCUs, like the state of AI, like where do we want to go with this? Like maybe how collectively we can get some funding together in order to put together a data set 2.0. So that's in the works now. Starting that consortium with other HBCUs, but yeah, HBCUs first have full access to the data set currently.
So the data, the information that has already been gathered for this particular project, what has been done with it, or what will be done with it? I mean, have you given it to Dr. Hildreth, and then she has disseminated, and then has she plugged it in to the wall?
We are in the process of plugging it in. And so, yes, we are in the process of ingesting the data with the hopes of improving our models and making voice technology more inclusive on the Google side. We also collected a comparison data set of mainstream American English. And what we want to do is, because we want basically like the Project Elevate Black Voices data and this comparable data set to be collected at the same time. So we have a nice way to be able to actually calculate word error rate and how we're able to reduce that racial disparity. And so that's going to be some evaluations that the team is running. Once we feel confident in our results, the goals are to push that into production. So hopefully the technology does work better for everyone from the community.
So how do you measure success for this particular project, Dr. Hildreth?
I think it's success that we completed, we got the data, right?
We got Black folks to sit down and participate.
We got Black folks for 3 weeks to sit down and participate. We have a beautiful data set that represents the linguistic diversity across the Black diaspora of language in the United States. So I think that is such an incredible feat. I think allowing access for HBCUs in particular to leverage the data set for their own scientific research is going to be incredible as well, because the more that people have access to the data, and why we wanted Howard in particular to host the data set and be the data stewards around responsible use, is we really want to see this problem reduced, not just for Google, but for others who care about making sure that there aren't these disparities in how people can speak to voice technology. And so, for us, of course, ingesting the data and success is, can we reduce that word error rate? Can we, make sure that Black speakers don't have as many errors compared to white speakers is going to be a massive win on the Google side. But the fact that this data set exists and is accessible to folks from HBCUs and eventually potentially beyond that is a massive win. And the community showed up.
That was so good.
Like Dr. Williams and the Howard team went to churches, they were at barbecues, we were at conferences. It was just a spectacular example of how when the community, believes in something, they show up and they contribute. And it was a powerful example of community-based research that I think could serve as an exemplar for other projects that care about inclusion.
Tell me a little bit more about that, Dr. Williams.
Mm-hmm.
you know that Black communities are often very, very skeptical about technology, number one. They also are suspicious of corporations. You know, the question is, or it's not even a question, it's one word, and you can probably put this in your data set as well. What you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and I'm sure you got a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, people were interested, and I'm glad they heard us out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think but that's also the piece of when community-based research is done, you have to have a trusted community partner that's doing a part of the legwork, right? Because in most times, and when people are doing community-based research, there's a power dynamic, right? But being that I was going into a lot of the communities that I frequented, or at least had other family members or friends that frequent that community, it was the guard was put down a little bit. So surprisingly, people were receptive and wanted to see, okay, technology like AI, it was the buzzword. So that's also piqued a little interest as well. But people did raise some skepticism of okay, where's my data going to? Who owns my data? So are you going to keep us updated with what the project is? And I think that's very valid, because oftentimes when researchers come into communities, they do the research and they leave, right? But it's just okay, you never follow up with the participants, and especially Black communities. Historically, we've been harmed in medical research time and time after again. We give everyone our data for them to learn about us, and we get nothing in return. But in this time, we really want to make sure, okay, we are taking care of our own. Howard is taking care of our own. So, but with that, a lot of people were excited, and I think a lot of the participants really valued that we were asking them for their thought processes, their experiences, and just even calling on them to even be a part of the process. Because a lot of people there, young and old, they knew what automatic speech recognition technologies were. They had it in their homes, they use it, right? And I think people recognizing, Siri doesn't understand me a lot when I'm driving and I'm texting. I have to do the voice to text because I'm driving. It calls random people. So everyone was able to grasp the issue and understand it. But I just think having that trusted partner within the community and making sure we are asking the hard questions and actually talking about some thorny issues that if other people were in the room, maybe people would be hesitant to ask those types of questions. But I think that was the highlight of the project, is the community actually having active involvement within curating the data set. And it was a really good experience.
And I would imagine it did not hurt to have the Howard University brand speaking to the various and sundry groups in the cities that you were visiting. So that, I think that was also helpful. We could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, I am out of time, but I want to thank both of you, Dr. Lucretia Williams and Dr. Courtney Heldreth, and congratulations. Congratulations. We will continue to watch this process. It's fascinating and would love to have you back. That is the Daily Drum for this Thursday, July 3rd. I'm Harold Fisher.